Hello class, today we're going to go over the next two sections of notes. The first one is from Of Plymouth Plantation. The essential question for this story is what happens when cultures collide? By the end of this lesson, you should be able to evaluate the text to determine the author's purpose and analyze the author's use of language, discuss the relationship between Native Americans and colonists, and use active and passive voice effectively. Now, author's purpose is the reason he or she writes a text. This purpose might be to inform, to entertain, to express beliefs or feelings, or to persuade. Some texts achieve more than one of these purposes. To analyze and then evaluate an author's purpose, consider the following. A text's genre provides clues to the author's overall purpose. Of Plymouth Plantation is a historical narrative, a text that tells about real events that happened in the past. So you have to ask yourself, based on the genre of this, let's say, for example, it's a historical narrative. What are some things that we can expect? Well, if somebody is telling us the history of something, we can assume that there's a lot of truth in what they're saying. They're probably trying to teach us something. On the other side, if it's a drama, and people are dying and all of these things, they're probably trying to make us feel something. Maybe feel bad for a certain group of people. Next, we're going to talk about audience. The text's intended audience, or the people intended to read the text, help suggest the author's reason for writing. Now, audience is really important because it's who the author intended to receive the message. Of Plymouth Plantation, for example, was intended to be read by future generations. You also need to look at a work's tone. The author's attitude toward the subject provides clues about purpose. As you read, note Bradford's vivid descriptions and what they reveal about his feelings and events and people. There's a difference between me saying, yeah, that was really great, and yeah, that was really great. When people speak, you can clearly understand their tone to know whether they're being sarcastic or genuine. Now, you can also do this with reading, but again, like we talked about with the last poem that we read, you need to look at things such as diction or even the syntax. We also need to look at the text's overall message or its central idea and what it suggests in terms of author's purpose. So what are they telling the audience? What message are they sending? Are they saying that, socialism is bad and we need to reject this? Are they saying you need to read more? What? As we read this text, you need to note clues about Bradford's message as you read. What is he trying to say? Now, analyzing language. One of the most common words you'll hear thrown around is the word diction in terms of analyzing language. Diction is the writer's choice of words. It can be formal or informal, technical or common, or abstract or concrete. The words that you choose to describe something are important because there are tons of words out there. So choosing the right one can be very critical. For example, if we look at the image on the left, we have Catwoman and Cat Lady. If you look at the actual language, woman and lady are considered, the same thing. But when you put them together, they paint totally different images. You don't think of a cat lady as being this strong, fierce, ferocious woman. No, that's a cat woman. So based on the diction an author chooses, different images resonate in our mind. With any text, it's important to pull out important diction. Now, when I was talking about formal and informal, think about the difference between texting your best friend and talking to your teacher. When you text your best friend, you're most likely using informal diction. When you're texting or when you're emailing your teacher, you're using formal diction. The difference between technical and common is that technical is related to a specific field, right? You would use technical language for something that's content specific, such as, an engineering class. If you're taking a class on engineering, every person in that class is expected to know certain terms related to engineering, so they use technical vocabulary. Now, common would be, okay, you're in an electrical engineering class, but you're talking to your grandmother trying to explain this to her who has no idea what anything is related to engineering. So you have to use more common language that everybody would know. And then abstract and concrete. Concrete is something is literally said, and abstract is you have to make an inference. It's not very clear. Rhetorical devices are techniques a writer uses to communicate ideas and convince readers of their truth. Repetition and allusion are the two examples of rhetorical devices, among others. We've already talked about allusions, and we did mention repetition. But you should look out for more. Similes, metaphors, juxtaposition, paradox, all of these are rhetorical devices. Now, repetition is repeating a word, phrase, or idea, and allusions are references to something the author expects will be familiar to readers. For example, references to the Bible for Bradford's audience. Anything that is colonial American literature will have biblical allusions in them. The reason is they were very religious people. Just like if you were to read, if you were to read something by the Mughals or the Ottoman Empire, they would also have allusions to the Quran, right? Because they were also very religious people. Now, language conventions. You may have heard this before, but we're going to talk about active and passive voice. The voice of a verb tells whether its subject performs or receives the action expressed by the verb. If the subject performs the action, for example, the dog jumps, the verb is in active voice. Liam mailed the letter. The subject is Liam. What did he do? He mailed the letter. However, if the subject receives the action, the verb is in passive voice. The letter was mailed. What was done? Well, it was mailed. Who or what was mailed? The letter. Could even say the letter was mailed by Liam. A lot of times, the difference between active and passive voice is they're flipped. The subject and the object are flipped. Think about when and why an author uses active and passive voice and how each use affects your perception of the event or events he or she describes. Active voice tends to be a little bit shorter and to the point. Passive is a little more complicated, and so you can have you can create different meanings or different lights to situation depending on active or passive voice. In essay writing, you should primarily be using active voice. It's a little less wordy, but it's okay to have some passive voice. Now let's talk about genre elements of a historical narrative. Historical narratives tell a true story about events that happened in the past. It's a narrative text that relates events in chronological order or the order in which they happened. It may be considered a primary source if the other observed events personally. So, for example, the William Bradford, right? He was actually at Plymouth Plantation, right? And so he's viewing these things and he's telling his stories. This is a primary source because he was there and doing these things. However, sometimes people write, like they research an event and then they write a historical narrative and they weren't actually there. That is not a primary source. So if the person that wrote it was actually there experiencing things, it's considered a primary source. So go ahead and take a second to write down the critical vocabulary and try to answer questions 1 through 4 in your notebook. I'll give you a little bit to do this and then we'll move on to the next set of notes. All right, the next set of notes is coming of age in Donlin. And the essential question for this section of notes is what happens when cultures collide? Again, we're going to talk about evaluating author's purpose. So we discussed author's purpose is the reason he or she writes a particular text. And this purpose is generally not stated, but instead you must infer or draw a logical conclusion about the purpose. No matter the purpose, effective writing must have an appealing style. Style elements include word choice, tone, which is the writer's attitude about the topic, and imagery, words that appeal to the reader's senses. Words have a really big power here, and it's up to you to decipher meaning from them. Use these points to analyze and evaluate coming of age in Donlin. Think about what the text says. What ideas does the author state directly, and what facts and examples does he include? Analyze the author's style. What words and images do you find especially powerful? What tone does the writing convey? What does the text's use of graphics or illustrations suggest? So if somebody is taking the time to put a graph or an image in their text, you should pay attention to this if it's in the original publishing. Now with your textbook always has images, but these images aren't, most of the time they weren't originally published with a text. But if we're giving a graph or an illustration from the author directly, focus on this because, okay, why are you giving this? You have to be hypercritical of everything that occurs in the text. And the last point, evaluate the text. How do the elements support man's purpose? Should be 1 N, not 2, sorry. Genre elements of history writing. So it's a type of nonfiction writing meant to inform readers about a historical person, time, or event. It relies on facts, dates, and verifiable details to support the main ideas. It incorporates quotations from and references to experts and scholars. And it uses primary source material to provide authenticity. So when we're talking about primary sources, again, it's somebody that was actually at the event. And so they might incorporate quotes from somebody who was actually there if this is not a primary source. And it may use graphic features such as maps and photographs. You see this in history writing, the use of maps and photographs, what comes to mind is, let's say, like the Vietnam War or World War II. For people that weren't there to help them understand, somebody writing about it might include a picture of the air base where people trained, or they might include a picture of the uniform that soldiers wore, or the map telling where each different group of soldiers was. So graphic features can become really, really important in understanding what actually happened, because we weren't there, so we didn't see, and maybe some of these places don't even exist anymore. So if you can show us a map or an image that will help us understand this, you can give a little bit more meaning to something. All right, now in terms of analyzing language, let's talk about technical terms first. Man draws on evidence from social scientists, and some of the language he uses come from specialized fields of study. Examples are casus belli and tripartite alliance. Man uses some Native American words when no accurate translation is available. He defines some terms in the text, others you have to look up in a dictionary. So he's using things that would have been content specific to the people around him in the time frame that he's talking about. Now we're going to have to look some of those things up. In terms of figurative language, words are often used in an imaginative way to make comparisons. A simile, for example, compares things using the words like or as. Man says an Indian not admitting a loss in a fight has like failing to resign after after losing a major piece in a chess tournament. This simile helps readers grasp an unfamiliar topic by comparing it to a familiar one. Similes and metaphors are both used to clarify meaning. Now, connotations are used to convey subtle shades of meaning. So authors choose words with particular connotations or associated feelings. For example, describing bedtime for a Native American family, Man uses the words firelight and lullaby. These words have pleasant connotations and help readers connect with the lives of people. We might use the connotations of words as opposed to the denotations in order to relate to our audience a little bit more. For example, the word epic is actually a long narrative poem, but the connotation with this is like, that was epic, it was awesome, right? So the connotation that's associated with that is not the one of a boring poem, but one of like an event that was amazing, it was awesome. So people use the connotation of this. All right, these are your vocab words for this text. You need to define these 5 terms in your notebook as you read. The definitions are in this section of reading, but you should know them in case they appear on the quiz. You should have them in your notebook. All right, that's it for notes. Have a great day.